History will record this not as a negotiation, but as an act of economic self-sabotage, driven by the impulsive bluster and America-first absolutism of the Trump administration. Washington didn't just fail to bully its closest ally, it lit a fuse under its own financial dominance. In a staggering miscalculation born of ego over strategy, Trump's trademark tariff threats didn't bring Canada to its knees. They catalyzed the very independent rival he sought to prevent, exposing how his volatile tactics are bankrupting American influence and enriching the neighbors he loves to ridicule. Breaking tonight. Washington's pressure campaign just collapsed spectacularly. America didn't win, they accelerated their own decline. Tensions are exploding across North America right now. The United States threatened to terminate the USMCA, cancel trade talks, and squeeze Canada into submission. But instead of capitulation, Ottawa triggered something Washington never saw coming, an economic reversal so complete, so devastating to American interests, that global investors are now fleeing U.S. markets for Canadian stability. Everyone believed Canada would bend under American pressure. Wall Street expected Ottawa to cave within weeks. Analysts assumed Canada's smaller economy couldn't withstand Washington's threats. They were all utterly, catastrophically wrong. Washington, December 20th, 2025. Standing before the press, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer delivered a warning designed to terrify Ottawa. America might walk away from the USMCA in 2026, the treaty that sustained $1 trillion in annual trade. Greer framed it as expendable, a tool Washington could discard whenever it suited American priorities. Translation: Washington just bet everything that Canada would collapse without American partnership. And what happened next reveals exactly why that assumption became the most expensive miscalculation in modern North American history. Because between September and November 2025, something extraordinary happened in continental economics. Washington pushed too hard, Ottawa said no, and Canada, strategic, patient Canada, became the destination every global investor started calling first. This isn't just about one failed pressure campaign. This is about the fundamental collapse of economic coercion as a strategy and the rise of Canadian sovereignty as the new foundation of North American power. Dear viewers, what you're about to see represents the most significant shift in continental economics in a generation. While Washington escalated threats, Canada quietly restructured its entire economic model. The data is staggering, the implications are permanent, and the reversal is already reshaping how the world views North American leadership. Let me show you exactly how this unfolded. The assault began with calculated precision. Greer's USMCA threat wasn't accidental rhetoric. It signaled Washington's readiness to unravel decades of continental integration. Then, President Trump escalated further, stating America intended to treat Canada with unprecedented directness, the kind usually reserved for subordinate partners. Canadian officials understood immediately. This was a declaration of economic war. Then came the cultural attack. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra raised objections to Canada's political advertising laws after Ontario aired a commercial on American television featuring Ronald Reagan's words about tariffs. Washington claimed Canadian political messaging was crossing borders inappropriately, conveniently ignoring decades of American political influence flowing north. Trade talks halted instantly. The pressure intensified when Washington began floating the possibility of breaking the USMCA into two separate agreements, fundamentally restructuring continental trade architecture. Every move carried the same message: submit or face isolation. Here's what Washington expected: immediate Canadian concessions, economic panic in Ottawa, and a government desperate to restore American favor. Standard playbook, predictable response. Except that's not what happened. Instead, Canadian Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne delivered a statement that signaled something fundamental had shifted. He acknowledged the frustration, but emphasized Canada was fully prepared to confront political pressure head-on while working with industry leaders and labor groups. His tone wasn't defensive, it was defiant. Translation: Ottawa just told Washington that Canadian sovereignty is non-negotiable. And the economic data that followed proved exactly why that confidence was justified. The International Monetary Fund released their December 2025 assessment, and the numbers stunned analysts across North America. Canada's economic resilience wasn't just holding, it was accelerating despite tariff risks. Foreign direct investment surged by nearly $78 billion, lifting total investment to approximately $1.5 trillion. Let me repeat that figure. $1.5 trillion in foreign investment flooding into Canada. While Washington threatened economic isolation, some analysts quietly admitted Canada's performance exceeded what American policymakers predicted when they launched this pressure campaign. The squeeze wasn't working. It was backfiring spectacularly. But the real transformation happened in Canada's supply chain infrastructure. Canadian businesses didn't just adapt, they innovated an entirely new model. They developed two distinct systems, one built to serve the American market, another tied to global partners across Europe, India, and South America. This dual-path strategy eliminated Canada's vulnerability to unilateral American policy shifts. The restructuring happened with stunning speed. Companies reconnected with European Union markets, strengthened export routes to India and Mexico, and built new partnerships across South America. Newfoundland and Labrador became the perfect example. More than half its oil production now flows to Europe, compared to the minimal fraction from 20 years ago. That's not just commercial adjustment, that's geopolitical realignment as Europe searches for stable energy sources outside conflict zones. Now ask yourself this question. What happens when external pressure becomes the catalyst for internal renewal? While Canada restructured and diversified, the American economy began showing cracks that hint at something far more serious than typical market volatility. U.S. manufacturing contracted for 9 consecutive months leading into November 2025. 9 straight months. That's the longest downturn since the 2008 financial crisis. This wasn't a shallow dip. This was structural damage inside America's industrial core. Major transport equipment manufacturers started cutting staff and shifting production to other countries where policy stability seemed more predictable. Corporate America was voting with its feet, and the destination wasn't Washington. Consumer confidence told the same story. Cyber Monday sales, one of retail's most critical benchmarks, rose by only 2.6%. For context, that's barely keeping pace with inflation. American households, facing shifting tariffs and rising costs, were tightening spending as economic signals turned increasingly negative. Then came the corporate rebellion. Costco filed a legal claim seeking refunds for tariff-related costs, potentially opening billions in government liability if similar claims succeed. This wasn't isolated frustration. This was corporate America publicly challenging the administration's trade strategy. Investment funds began reassessing the United States as a higher-risk policy environment. Let that sink in. Global capital that once viewed America as the world's safest investment destination was now treating it as unpredictable and unstable. Preliminary data suggested capital was flowing toward markets with steadier regulatory environments, markets like Canada with the second highest ratio of foreign direct investment to GDP in the G20. Canada emerged as a safe harbor for global capital during American policy chaos. More than 50 free trade agreements gave companies operating in Canada access to massive international markets without facing Washington's volatile tariff climate. Corporations from Europe, Japan, and South Korea increasingly selected Canada as their North American entry point. Infrastructure quality, workforce skills, and regulatory consistency made Canada the reliable environment for long-term planning that America's policy turbulence couldn't match. Even American companies started reconsidering their domestic expansion plans. Instead of investing in U.S. facilities during a period of uncertainty, they viewed Canada as a more stable operational base. That shift represents something profound: American businesses choosing Canadian stability over American volatility. Canada responded to these opportunities with industrial policy designed for the new reality. The government encouraged manufacturers to return production to domestic plants, reducing reliance on American components. Surveys revealed overwhelming support among Canadian manufacturers for incentives supporting nearshoring, local sourcing, and supply chain independence. This wasn't reactive policy, this was strategic reconstruction. Canadian businesses increased reliance on domestic suppliers, strengthened partnerships with local producers, and built new manufacturing capabilities. These investments reduced exposure to tariff swings while creating more stable production environments. Meanwhile, future-focused sectors, electric vehicles, clean energy, critical minerals, expanded rapidly as global industries sought reliable suppliers and predictable conditions. Canada became the valued partner for industries requiring stable, long-term planning. The global engagement strategy accelerated everything. Canada broadened trade outreach to Europe, India, and Asia, transforming regional pressure into opportunities for a diversified economic strategy. The European Union, dealing with geopolitical instability elsewhere, viewed Canada as a dependable partner for energy and mineral supplies. Asian businesses saw Canada as a secure gateway for accessing Western markets, with trade agreements and regulatory stability that American enterprises couldn't match during their policy unpredictability phase. Now, here's where the story gets truly remarkable. Washington's strategy has drifted so far from its original objectives that the outcome looks like the opposite of what the administration intended. Pressure designed to force Canadian alignment accelerated Canada's independent economic rise. If the United States ultimately withdraws from the USMCA, analysts believe Canada could strengthen its position as a major alternative manufacturing and supply chain hub within North America, a possibility virtually no one in Washington considered when this confrontation began. The more America leaned into policy unpredictability, the more global companies shifted toward Canada as their reliable anchor. Canada expanded its presence in critical sectors: energy, essential minerals, advanced manufacturing, high technology. With each new investment, the regional balance tilted in ways suggesting a subtle but permanent redistribution of influence. Some voices in Washington are beginning to whisper what few want to say publicly: the administration might be weakening American influence by allowing uncertainty to spread across the region. The landscape policymakers hope to shape feels farther from reach. While the landscape that emerged looks nothing like what they planned, this raises the question that's grown too large to ignore. Has America's effort to gain leverage ended up empowering a stronger rival right on their doorstep, fundamentally changing the regional balance in ways almost no one saw coming? Meanwhile, the political dimension grows more concerning. Ambassador Hakra attempted to calm rising worry over whether America's national security strategy could justify Washington supporting political factions inside Canada. He maintains America has no interest in Canadian domestic debates, yet he simultaneously pointed to Ontario's Reagan ad as Canadian political messaging crossing borders. Former Canadian diplomat Archer Wilsinski argues the strategy's language signals possible support for Trump-aligned movements in Canada and notes Hakra avoided offering an absolute assurance that America would never interfere. That gap in clarity is fueling debate as it intensifies as both countries prepare for another politically charged year. The USMCA faces its first major assessment next year. Consultations are already underway, with each country preparing positions for what could become a pivotal moment for continental trade. Prime Minister Mark Carney met with President Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum during a FIFA World Cup gathering in Washington, holding a 45-minute discussion where all three agreed to keep working together on the agreement. But momentum has shifted. The question isn't whether Canada can survive American pressure. The data already answered that definitively. The question is whether Washington understands that its strategy has fundamentally backfired, accelerating the exact outcome it sought to prevent: an economically independent Canada with strengthened global partnerships and reduced reliance on American markets. From reliance to resilience. That's not just a slogan anymore. That's the new foundation of Canadian economic strategy, built on the wreckage of Washington's failed pressure campaign. If you want to understand how power is actually shifting in North America right now, how sovereignty replaces subordination, and why Canada's strategic patience is reshaping continental economics, you're watching the right analysis. Everything I've shown you tonight comes from public data and official reporting, but the conclusions? Those are mine. You decide what it means.